Welcome into episode 128 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm Augustrometer.
Hear ye the Thunderclap. Google's Project Zero hits Apple, and the EFF wants encryption in the cloud. Find out what we're talking about on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. After over 2 years of doing this show, I'm starting to feel like I can spot social engineering traps, password problems, wetware issues. I don't know everything, but when I hear a story or read an article, I feel like I can sort of, get it. Hardware, on the other hand, leaves me feeling way out of my depth. So imagine the glazed look in my eye when I read about Thunderclap, a security vulnerability via the Thunderbolt interface with USB-C ports. I'm sorry, did I doze off just reading that last part of that sentence? Because that happens. Yeah, and we haven't even gotten to the confusing part yet. Mr. Trometer, can you please make Thunderclap make sense to me?
Sure. I know this is a silly question, but do you remember the movie The Matrix?
Oh, that classic, that very old movie now, that ridiculously now old movie. Yes.
Bullet time. How cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. Yeah, it was fantastic. And, kids today would be like, I'm not going to watch a 21-year-old movie. What's wrong with you? Yes, I remember The Matrix.
Is it that old?
Yeah, 98 or 99. I can't remember which.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. I got to get better references.
Hey, we did a whole show about the movie Hackers one time. So really...
I'll frame this in terms of what we saw in the movie. You've got Neo, Trinity, Morpheus, the rest of the gang, and they could essentially jack in, a big wired connection. And in this case, let's call it USB-C, was plugged into the back of their heads. And because of that, they could do all kinds of stuff after a quick upload. It's because a port went straight to their brain, or in the case of computers, straight to memory. And it completely bypassed any other filters they might have. So let's say you need to know how to fly a helicopter or do kung fu. Tank uploads the skills straight to your brain/memory. And if you trust Tank, you've got nothing to worry about. But if you don't, you have no idea what he's uploading into your brain or why.
Okay, so that part actually does make, this part of this piece from the Mac Observer make sense to me. The way it read, it said that USB-C ports through which the Thunderbolt interface connects with a computer offer very privileged low-level direct memory access, or DMA, the researchers explain. This means that peripherals connected by Thunderbolt have much more privileges than a standard USB device. The researchers found the operating systems had very weak defenses against malicious DMA-enabled peripheral devices. The Thunderbolt device could access all network traffic, as well as, on occasion, being able to access keystrokes and frame buffer data. I wish, honestly, that they had just said, so remember that part in The Matrix? Because then I would have understood. Because seriously, you could probably hear it while I was reading that. Yes, it all makes sense, but it all just kind of, runs together and becomes this thing. It's like, man, I hope somebody fixes this so I don't have to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got your OS. Between you and the keyboard, there's an OS. Mm-hmm. Between you and your internet connection, there's the OS. But for USB-C, those devices, they get direct access to your laptop's memory. Mm-hmm. And like in The Matrix, it bypasses any filters or protections you might have on that laptop.
All right, here's the thing. That all then makes this sound wildly risky. I mean, I get the speed, I get the allure of one type of port and connector serving multiple devices and purposes, although I'm sitting here with a dongle and another dongle because while, we got this one connection that'll do everything, I've got a bunch of other peripherals that don't have that kind of connection. But I get it. I get eventually why USB-C is going to be awesome for everyone. The only thing is, assuming something is supposed to stop this from happening, that's apparently not doing the trick right now. I mean, what is that thing and why is that thing not working?
Yet, I think it comes down to the fact that no one really saw this kind of exploit coming, especially the USB-C people. I mean, ideally, there should not be a problem here. And you plug in your device, it does what you think it's going to do, and everything's hunky-dory. But that's not what's going on. And really, like I said, I don't think anyone saw this kind of thing coming. Well, not everyone.
Okay. Well, I mean, because and this is another part where I'm going to ask you to explain a bit more. There's this thing called IOMMU. It stands for, and I know what it stands for. It stands for Input Output Memory Management Unit. Apparently somebody did see this coming. Is that not working, or is everybody not using it? I mean, first of all, how is that supposed to do what it's supposed to do? And then if that's there, why is there still the trouble?
So the IOMMU basically looks at your USB-C devices and says, okay, I'm going to give that device access to this block of memory and nothing else. And that's exactly what every laptop should do. Unfortunately, IOMMU units are more expensive than not having them. And so if you're going to go the cheap route, you're not going to have that. Fortunately for, those of us who are Apple users, Apple tends to go, okay, well, it's okay if it's a little more expensive. We're going to go ahead and do it anyway. If you've got a Dell, you've got more problems. So
then for most people listening to this show, this is SecureMac that is putting out, the checklist brought to you by SecureMac, as we say. For people listening to this show, this is mostly not a problem.
Mostly not a problem. I think for older versions of the OS on the Mac, it was kind of an issue. I think those have all been resolved, and now it's not a problem if you have a Mac.
So do you want to argue a tiny bit? I'm not trying to get you to. I'm just wondering if you do.
Maybe.
Okay, let's see what happens. There was a German gentleman we talked about a month ago that had the keys to a pretty scary Mac security flaw. The guy's name was Linus Hentz, and what he had, according to a piece from Apple Insider, were details on a flaw that could allow apps to see passwords held in Mojave's keychain security feature. He actually built an app to show that it worked. He made sure that Apple knew about it. Then he refused to give the Cupertino company the details, protesting against the fact that Apple has no bug bounty program for macOS the way it does for iOS. Now, the piece says Hentz actually emailed Apple saying, "I'm willing to immediately submit you the full details, including a patch, if an official Apple representative sends me an official and reasonable statement why Apple does not have nor wants to create a bug bounty program for macOS." Now, apparently, Apple got in touch with the guy to ask about the bug, though the company does not seem to have addressed his bug bounty concern. He restated his demand, which got a whole lot of nothing. And now Apple Insider says he has actually turned over everything he knows about the bug without payment from Apple to Apple. Hentz says the problem is too important to keep to himself, according to the report. Now, I seem to remember, August, that you thought this guy was holding Apple and every Mac owner hostage. Do you still feel like that's what he was doing?
Yes, but first, let me say that Apple not having a bug bounty program here is part of the problem. They definitely should be offering rewards for researchers like this guy who take the time to help make Apple's platform safe. That said, I do think Hentz was originally holding Apple and Mac users hostage. And I think for whatever reason, lack of bounty, doing the right thing, who knows, he did come forward to them with the exploit. And I also think his request of Apple to explain why you don't have a bounty system was a much more reasonable and less selfish-looking request.
Is there something you think he could have done differently?
You know, it would have been nice if he'd reached out to Apple first, then made a big hullabaloo, instead of the other way around. But you can't change the past, and I'm just glad he's making good on the future.
Okay. See, I want to, well, you and I are on opposite sides of that, honestly. I mean, I'm glad he came forward. I'm glad he, did give this to Apple. What I said actually on macOS Ken was we're lucky that he's white hat. Because while Apple doesn't have a bug bounty program, there are plenty of people out there who would have paid him a decent amount of money for what he had. Because what he
absolutely.
had, it was literally the keys to keychain, right? Now, I do want to be careful with this next bit because I don't want to malign any individual working at Apple. I think that everybody on Apple's security team is doing the absolute best that they can. I think that they're all working to keep our computing experience as safe as can be. As a company, though, as a gigantic organization, does Apple take Mac security seriously enough in your estimation?
No one gets it right 100% of the time, not even Apple. I like what Apple tries to do. I like what they've done in the past. But I do think, especially in this case, the Mac suffers from a lack of attention while iOS gets all of Apple's resources. Mm-hmm. I'd really like to see them give some TLC to the Mac, both from a security point of view as well as a feature point of view. I don't think that's an original complaint. I think a lot of people are saying exactly the same thing. But it seems like Apple is spending all of their time, money, and effort where they get all of their sales, and right now that's iOS. And to me, that's really unfortunate because, I've got this laptop in front of me that I feel like needs to be as secure as my phone.
Yeah. I think there was an interview with Jeff Williams. Not an interview. He was actually speaking at a university a couple of weeks ago. Jeff Williams, Chief Operating Officer of Apple, who acknowledged the fact that Apple is, the richest company on the planet at this point, or the most valuable company on the planet at this point. But Apple doesn't think of itself that way. He still thinks of them as the, on the brink company that he went to work for in 98 or 99, back when everybody was waiting for that new movie, The Matrix, to come out, by the way. and here's the thing. That's great, as far as if you want to sort of from a philosophical point of view, run your business that way, thinking we got to be nimble, we got to be quick. At some point, though, you've also got to acknowledge that you now have, you're richer than Croesus, right? Or you've got more money than Croesus. You can certainly afford to spend an extra 10 or 20 bucks on the security side of it. I mean, yes, it makes sense that they are spending more time focusing on iOS because there are like 1 billion iOS devices out there. And I don't think 1 billion is actually an overstatement at this point.
No.
There are like 1 billion iOS devices out there. There are considerably fewer Macs, but the people who are actually using Macs, first of all, are paying a lot more than they have to for just a run-of-the-mill computer. And, a lot of them are doing some pretty powerful stuff on there. You would want to kind of maybe see that kind of attention, as you say, paid to that. Now,
yeah, it's crazy to me. I saw a figure, and I'm losing track of the number, but it was a huge number. It was somewhere in the billions of dollars that Apple spends on research every single year. Mm-hmm. And you don't think they could take like one of those billions and just throw it at the Mac and say, like, make it more secure? Well, that's crazy to me.
I mean, they are making it more secure. I mean, here, I wonder honestly if it is. I have heard some people say that the reason Apple doesn't want to have a bug bounty program is because they don't want people to think that the Mac can get malware. They don't want people to think that the Mac can have a security risk, right? And so if they then commission, here's this pot of money. If you find something wrong with the Mac, you let us know. We're going to pay you for it. That's almost like Apple admitting, that these machines are vulnerable, even though anybody who's paying attention knows that every machine is vulnerable. I don't know. I mean,
but so you phrase it differently. You call it a challenge instead of a bounty. You know, it's like, okay, we think we've got the most secure platform available. Prove us wrong.
Well, you kind of don't want to do that, though, because then it's on the local news. They're like, hey, some 13-year-old kid got $1 million off Apple in 6 hours. All right, so here's the thing. I got another story that I want to run past you, and these stories aren't exactly the same, but they pair well in my head, and, we'll see how it, goes spilling out of my head. Apple got hit by Google's Project Zero earlier this week, which I was only kind of familiar with. I didn't really grok the fullness until one of the guys from SecureMac explained it to me. Anybody who doesn't know, basically when Google learns of a vulnerability, it contacts the organization or organizations affected, gives them as much information on the vulnerability as it has, then starts the clock. At that point, the affected orgs have 90 days to fix the issue, though there is the possibility of a 2-week grace period if the company's, close to a fix. Then when that time's expired, Project Zero publishes all of the information it has on the vulnerability, even if that vulnerability is not yet fixed. Does this sound like holding companies hostage to you?
No, because there's no ransom there. Okay. It's basically, I feel like it's just peer pressure. And which I think is really, really healthy. And the fact that Google does this is awesome. And I don't say a lot of good things about Google.
Right. Right.
But the fact that they do this in order to make everything more secure, I think is so great. And if we had more peer pressure from more companies, I think we would all have more secure platforms.
Now, I said that Apple got hit by Project Zero earlier this week. It was actually this past weekend, according to Engadget, that Google detailed a high-severity macOS kernel flaw that lets people modify a user-mounted file system image without the virtual management subsystem being any the wiser, theoretically letting an attacker go unnoticed by users. Apple is working on a patch, but the disclosure ahead of the fix could leave Mac users vulnerable until it's ready. I actually didn't realize, I think I read in your notes a little bit, somewhere on the page here, that fix is already out/in. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was 6 days past the 90-day mark, but they did. Apple did release a fix.
Okay. I said in the last segment that hardware issues scare and confuse me. I'm just a simple caveman, as caveman lawyer used to say. Lines of code also scare and confuse me. Like I said, though, I did go look at them because Google posted them because they were out there. Taking a look at the code, it didn't make sense to you.
Definitely. From what I can tell, it's based on filling up your available RAM. So if you have, say, 1 gig of RAM or whatever it is, when that RAM gets full, the OS does what's called paging, where it takes a big chunk of the data in your RAM and writes it off to a hard drive instead of locking the OS up. And if you do the exploit right, you can have the OS write malicious code to your hard drive instead of just some bytes of memory.
Yeah, you scare me that you could look at all that and just have it make sense. But whatever. It's not quite as scary as... I used to know a guy who... was it Fortran? Is that the one that's all numbers? I can't remember. I used to know a guy who would go under the hood on some machine that I worked on regularly. And it would just all be numbers, and he would be able to look at it and then go, "Oh yeah, there's that." And I was like, "You're the devil." So, how scary did this whole thing look to you? I mean, when you saw that, was this something that we all had to freak out about, or was it one of those random proof of concept, but you really didn't have to worry?
Don't get me wrong. Any exploit is something you should worry about.
Okay.
But this doesn't look like something where, you just hide yourself in a cellar and don't touch anything that, uses electricity for 6 months until it gets fixed. It's not terribly scary. But who knows what a devious mind might do with this exploit. Google gave Apple 90 days to fix it. And strangely enough, when the exploit became public, the fix came just a few days later. Is that a coincidence?
See,
I'm not going to say no.
Here's the thing, though. So if that's the case, Why did they wait the 90 days? I mean, look, here there are a couple things I wonder. One of them is 90 days enough time to give companies to fix issues like this before going public? Because if you get to that 90-day mark and it hasn't been fixed, my assumption is they actually needed more time, although you're right. It is kind of strange that, once it's out there, it's like, yeah, we'll get to it. I mean, is 90 days enough as far as you're concerned?
90 days is forever in internet time, and I think it's very generous. I mean, it's 3 months. Come on, it's a full quarter. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of companies, and in this case, Google, using peer pressure to force fixes. I wish they wouldn't have to do that, but it makes software safer for all of us. I've been in situations myself where you have to choose whether to spend your resources, and resources being, people, time, and money, on bug fixes or new features. And I will guarantee you every single time management will always choose new features because that's where the money is. But sometimes the bug fixes are more important. And Google is doing the right thing here. And I can't believe I just said that.
A call for greater privacy protection from Apple. We'll get to that in a second, but first, a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. As careful as you are about the sites you visit, as careful as you are about the apps you install, there are hazards out there into which you and your Mac might stumble. Protect yourself with MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by SecureMac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for well over a decade. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. You may never stumble into trouble, but if you do, MacScan 3's got your back. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by SecureMac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. We'll end the day with a call for Apple to be more privacy-minded. Mac Rumors ran a piece earlier this week that had the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, calling on Apple to implement user-encrypted iCloud backups that are inaccessible to the company and thus to law enforcement. According to the report, iCloud content uploaded to Apple is encrypted at the location of the server, and, with the proper legal requests, Apple can provide iCloud information that includes name, address, email, mail logs with date and timestamps, photos, Safari browsing history, iMessages, and more, with full details outlined by Apple on its privacy site. The way the EFF sees it, Apple should let users protect themselves and allow them truly encrypted iCloud backups. Now, I feel like I'm missing a step here, and it's probably signal flow, because I am really bad at signal flow. Stuff goes from my phone or my Mac to iCloud. Where and when is it that it gets encrypted? Or perhaps more to the point, where and when is it not encrypted?
Well, I think that's the big question, isn't it? Messages, for example, the EFS says messages can be decrypted, but from my understanding, the only key that can decrypt messages is on my iOS device or my Mac. So Apple doesn't have access to that. Other things like the mail logs, do they allow access to the actual messages? I don't know. And it's a real question. And that's part of the problem, is that we should know 100% one way or the other what's encrypted, what's not, what we should worry about, what we shouldn't.
Well, we know, though, that everything on iCloud isn't encrypted because we do know that Apple can work with law enforcement to give you a lot of that information. I mean, you're right about iMessage, actually. I thought iMessage was encrypted end-to-end, although Well, I mean, I did think iMessage was encrypted end to end, and maybe it's not fair to kind of like what I said earlier. I trust the security people at Apple. I also trust the EFF. But if the EFF is trying to, generate notice, then they may be a little bit lax, and like all this stuff can be accessed. And it turns out, well, maybe not all the stuff, but a lot of the stuff can.
Exactly.
I don't know. I will say, I thought honestly that this was a thing that Apple did or didn't do intentionally so that it could play nice with law enforcement. Not only is that not Apple's stated reason, Apple CEO Tim Cook figures, or at least says he figures, that they will go with encrypted iCloud backups at some point. As for why they don't currently, they say it's so that they can get you into your information should you ever find yourself locked out. Apple has not encrypted iCloud backups according to the piece because doing so would prevent Apple from being able to restore iCloud backups for users who have forgotten their passwords. Still, CEO Cook figures truly encrypted iCloud backups will be a thing at some point. Mac Rumors highlights an interview Cook did with the German site Der Spiegel, wherein he said, "Our users have a key and we have one. We do this because some users lose or forget their key and then expect help from us to get their data back. It is difficult to estimate when we will change this practice, but I think that will be regulated in the future, as with the devices, so we will not have a key for it in the future." Not casting aspersions here, but do you buy Cook's comments on this?
No.
Okay. Tell me why.
I don't buy his explanation at all. Apple by any measure is a secretive company, and they don't like to telegraph what they're doing for a lot of different reasons. I mean, they're the largest company in the world, and anything they say either rattles markets or gets them sued. So they have to be very careful about what they say. And, for example, remember when Steve Jobs said no one wants to watch movies on a small screen? And then 6 months later, they released an iPod that displayed movies on a small screen.
Right.
Who knows why that is? Maybe market research said, this is what people want. Maybe they were working on it all along. Who knows? But that's what happened. I think something similar is going on here. For some technical reason, they can't deliver the security we all want, but it feels as if they're working on it. And Cook's comments aren't just, they're just cover until they can deliver something that they can talk about in a press release. I honestly believe that, especially with sort of the privacy stance that Apple has taken, that they want to do the right thing here. And for whatever reason, whether it be technical or political or what have you, there are reasons that they can't do it right now. But I'm quite certain that's the direction they're moving.
Lest you think the EFF is picking on Apple, Mac Rumors says the EFF has demands for other technology companies in addition to our friends in Cupertino. Android, it says, should let users deny and revoke apps' internet permissions, while Twitter should end-to-end encrypt direct messages, and Facebook should just, go out of business. I'm kidding. Facebook should stop using phone numbers provided for account creation for targeted advertising. They go on to say WhatsApp should obtain user consent before adding users to groups. Slack should give free workspace administrators control over data retention, and Verizon should stop pre-installing spyware on some smartphones. So, little things. just a little list of things to do from the EFF.
Can I point out that we've gone an entire episode and haven't bashed on Facebook once?
Honestly, I just didn't have the heart this week. There's a story out there that I would imagine we'll be talking about next week, but after a while, Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you will find notes for this show. You'll find notes for the last show. Heck, we might even have notes for the one before that. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask, I forgot. You remember last week you said you wanted a name for companies that do things? Right?
Yes.
Who do things that are sort of, we needed something like the Google Glass people that you talked about, using that term that I don't really like. Freepy. Freepy. Our friend Bart from Ireland said Freepy. It's free and it's creepy. It's Freepy. is what he said. So there you go. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit or some other term you want to throw at us, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.